They raised their glasses, crystal lights flashing, and my daughter stood in the center, loudly calling me, the man who made her mother die in shame. 180 people applauded. The groom's side laughed like a knife. I sat at table 14 in a $200 suit, a man pushed out of his own daughter's life by the entire ballroom. Robert Hale clutched his water glass, knuckles white against the crystal stem. From his isolated perch at table 14 near the kitchen's swinging doors, he watched his only daughter Vanessa shine beneath the Four Seasons Houston's opulent chandeliers. Her Vera Wang wedding dress worth more than 10,000 caught, the light with each movement transforming her into something ethereal, untouchable. Beside her stood Christopher Sterling, heir to Sterling Banking, his tuxedo tailored to perfection, not a thread out of place. Between them sat Whitman, the silver-haired financial advisor to the Sterling family, beaming with paternal pride. The MC's voice boomed across the ballroom. And now a special moment, as Christopher would like to say a few words. Christopher took the microphone, his confidence radiating through his warm, assured voice. Ladies and gentlemen, today is a great day not only for us, but for both families. I want to say a few words to the man I see as Vanessa's true father. Robert looked up momentarily dazed, a flicker of hope crossing his weathered face. Perhaps despite everything there would be acknowledgement of his 30 years raising Vanessa alone after Laura's death. But Christopher turned and took Whitman's hand, the older man's silver hair slicked back above a spotless white collar. Uncle Whitman, thank you for guiding us, for teaching us what grit and class mean. Vanessa often says you are the model of the man she always wished for in her life. Today we officially have you as a spiritual father. Applause rolled through the hall like summer thunder. Cameras panned to capture Vanessa's radiant smile as she leaned against Whitman's shoulder, a picture-perfect moment for a society wedding. Not a single lens turned toward table 14 where Robert sat motionless, forgotten by the celebration he had partially funded. Not a single word mentioned the 3 decades he'd spent raising his daughter. Robert set down his water glass carefully, as if one hard move would shatter the world. The blonde woman next to him whispered to her companion, "Poor thing, he must have nothing left." Her partner nodded solemnly. He couldn't keep his career. Now the girl needs a different dad. The weight of their pity stung worse than open mockery. Robert bit his lip to keep the tears at bay even as memories flooded back Laura on her deathbed, his hand gripping hers, promising to protect their daughter at any cost. The day he signed the largest defense contract of his life, a top-secret naval radar project that required absolute confidentiality, even from family. He had chosen silence for 8 years, letting his daughter believe her father was a has-been, so she would learn humility and grit. He was wrong. His silence had created a vacancy others had eagerly filled. A young guest, clearly a friend of Christopher's, passed Robert's table and paused with a smirk. "Model father-in-law," he told his buddy, "seat by the kitchen water glass Men's Warehouse suit. Perfect." They laughed and moved on, oblivious to how deeply their words cut. Their casual cruelty transported Robert back to a winter morning in Austin when Vanessa was 6. She had hugged his leg and begged, "Daddy, don't go on a business trip. Stay with me and Mom." He had promised to return soon with radar schematics he believed would change the defense industry. He thought working tirelessly was securing her future. Yet now she treated that work like dust beneath her designer shoes. In his jacket pocket, Robert felt the weight of the old iPhone and the notarized deeds he had prepared, clipped to a copy of the merger agreement the Sterlings had tried to force him to sign right after Laura's funeral. He carried them tonight not from paranoia, but because he knew if they dared announce a merger publicly, his silence would become consent, and Hale Dynamics would truly fall into their hands. Robert took another sip of water, letting the bland taste spread through his mouth as a reminder. To bring down an opponent, sometimes you must let them believe they've already won. And at this moment, both Vanessa and the Sterling family were certain he was just a poor old man waiting for the party to end so he could quietly disappear. The ballroom's warm glow made the white tablecloth shine a stark canvas, highlighting the emptiness surrounding Robert. No champagne, no congratulatory handshakes, just the occasional pitying glance from servers who noted his isolation. He set his hand on his suit pocket where the old iPhone and sealed file rested, and his fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but from knowing he carried what could turn this entire wedding into a public reckoning. Mr. Hale, looking up, Robert found Marissa Cole, his attorney, standing beside his table. In her simple navy dress, she didn't blend with the guest's glitter, But that simplicity carried its own power, the calm, sharp eyes of someone accustomed to seeing through luxurious veneers. "Are you all right?" Marissa asked, resting a hand lightly on his chair. Robert forced a smile. "All right enough. I think I have sufficient patience to sit through the reception." Marissa bent closer, her voice pitched for his ears only. "You don't need patience anymore. I brought a notarized copy of the will. Everything lawfully signed last week. They can't deny it." At that, Robert felt warmth spread through his chest. The truth now had a firm foothold not only in his hands, but in the legal system. He nodded slightly and removed from his pocket the old silver iPhone, its screen scratched and home button worn after years of use. What lived in its memory, Laura's voice memo, was the real weapon. He powered it on the Apple logo, appearing a cool light in his eyes. Marissa glanced at the device. "You've backed it up to the company server, right?" "Of course," Robert replied, "not only to Hail Dynamics server, but also 2 copies in the cloud and 1 at the bank. This device is merely a keepsake, but tonight I want to use the original." Marissa smiled with quiet confidence. "You're doing the right thing. They'll find it hard to deny when her voice rings through this hall." Robert drew a deep breath, inhaling the mixture of luxury perfumes, wine, and the white orchids adorning the tables. To him, it smelled like steel in the old radar shop, tense, stifling, ready for battle. He straightened the file on his lap containing the deed to the lakeside villa in Austin, valued at $6.5 million, the Hail Dynamics stock option, papers worth tens of millions, in the new will Marissa had mentioned, all tucked neatly into a brown leather folder, like any ordinary documents, though he knew each page would detonate like artillery once revealed. "Only when you're ready," Marissa said, touching his shoulder lightly. "I'll be right here." Robert looked at her with momentary gratitude. In a room crowded with counterfeit smiles, she was the only one who didn't view him as a failure. Sometimes a single look of trust is enough to pull a man back from the precipice. He closed his hand around the iPhone, feeling its cold metal against his skin, thinking of Laura, her gentle smile, soft voice, and final instruction. "Robert, don't let our girl lose her way." Perhaps he had been wrong to let silence stretch for 8 years, but tonight he would not make that mistake again. The band transitioned to a slower number. Couples flowed onto the dance floor, expensive fabrics swirling under the dimmed lights. Robert remained seated, watching the celebration unfold around him. The Sterling family held court at the center table, as if the entire reception orbited around them. Whitman's perfectly groomed silver hair caught the light as he patted Christopher's shoulder with pride. Vanessa sat between them, champagne flute in hand, her smile carrying a strange shine that no longer belonged to Robert's world. "Does he really have nothing left?" A low male voice from the next table reached Robert's ears. "Yes, they say he sold the house, and the company is hardly his anymore." A blonde woman answered her tone, mixing pity with scorn. "At least the girl found the right harbor." Robert lowered his head and gripped the tablecloth palms, damp each. Nothing left, stabbing into his chest like a physical blow. He thought back to that winter morning after Laura's diagnosis, sitting in his small office, the desk lamp illuminating thick contracts bearing the Department of Defense logo. Laura was still in the hospital, then Vanessa asleep on a hallway chair. He had known that if Laura recovered, he would tell her everything. But if she passed, perhaps silence was the only way to protect their daughter from those who would use the family's sudden wealth against them. 3 months after Laura's diagnosis, the Pentagon had called. Hail Dynamics, the company Robert built from nothing, had won the largest contract in naval radar history, a stealth sensor system to track submarines at record depths. The value nearly $50 million over 5 years. The condition total secrecy, including finances. The Department of Defense controlled all income reports, and any leak constituted a breach of national security. For 2 years, Robert fought Laura's disease the way he managed defense projects. He sold their Colorado mountain vacation home to fund the first surgery. He drained retirement accounts for immunotherapy at Johns Hopkins. Every medical bill stretched 6 figures long, slashing at the belief that love could outfight death. All while hiding the truth about the contract, that even as they seemed to be losing everything, unprecedented wealth was flowing into accounts he couldn't touch or speak about. Vanessa, in her early 20s, then witnessed it all, her father signing check after check, their warm Austin house growing emptier, Robert driving an old pickup instead of a luxury sedan. She believed her father had squeezed out every last dollar to save her mother. And Robert let her believe it because Laura's words echoed in his mind, Do not let our girl think money is everything. Let her learn the value of character. Laura did not survive. After 2 years of fighting, she left them on a cold December morning. Before she went, she gripped Robert's hand one last time, her skin translucent and fragile. Do not spoil her. Do not let wealth eclipse integrity. Less than a month after the funeral, Robert received an envelope from Sterling Capital. Inside was a draft merger agreement with his name already typed on the last page, as if they were certain he would sign. The terms were clear. Hale Dynamics would become a unit under Sterling control. In return, Robert would receive an annual stipend of $200,000, a pittance compared to what the company generated. He folded the document and sent it back with a single line, "Not signed, not now, not ever." In that moment, Robert understood his silence would not suffice. Sooner or later, they would try to force a public declaration or use public opinion against him. He decided to live like a worn-out middle-class man, moving to a small apartment in Austin, driving a 2010 Toyota Camry, shopping at Target, eating dinner at a familiar diner, while watching his bank account swell with millions he couldn't acknowledge. He allowed Vanessa to believe her father had nothing left but memories of her mother. Yet each month he quietly paid portions of her student loans, sent anonymous cashier's checks to prevent her credit from being ruined, helped with deposits when she rented new places. Over 8 years, the total reached hundreds of thousands of dollars. She never questioned where the money came from, perhaps thinking luck had smiled on her, or a bank had miscalculated. Robert had believed this misconception would make her stronger, teach her to stand on her own feet, but he had underestimated the arrogance growing within her. While he lived in self-imposed austerity, Vanessa entered the world of tailored suits, $1,000 wines, and families like the Sterlings, who spoke of class as if it could be purchased with a black card. Now watching his daughter lean toward Christopher, whispering something that made the young banker laugh, Robert felt the weight of his miscalculation. He had kept silent to fulfill Laura's wish that their daughter learn the value of character over wealth, but that silence had allowed others to fill Vanessa's life with precisely the materialistic values they had hoped to protect her from. An older man at the next table, likely a banking partner, glanced at Robert and whispered to his wife, "Pitiful, isn't it? New money burns out fast. At least the girl chose the right family." Robert turned away, not wanting them to see the redness in his eyes, but deep inside he vowed they would not whisper like that again. The world was about to discover that the forgotten man at table 14 was neither poor nor broken. The jazz band began playing "Fly Me to the Moon." Couples twirled beneath the chandeliers, expensive watches catching the light with each turn. A server leaned toward Robert. "Would you like more champagne, sir? The Sterlings have paid for everything." Robert shook his head. He didn't want their pretense of generosity. What he needed was clarity, because he knew this night would not end as they planned. Yet in this moment, amid the crisp laughter and casual cruelty, he remained a shadow at his own daughter's wedding. No one approached table 14 to speak with him. No one mentioned his name in toasts. And when the MC called the bride's family for photos, Robert was forgotten, noticing only when the flash went off without him in the frame. The crystal chandelier cast pale gold light that flooded the hall with slick luxury. Glass clinked as laughter from men in Armani suits and diamond-laden ladies rose and fell around him. For a father, it should have been pure joy. For Robert, it felt like a silent courtroom where each glance and whisper delivered another indictment. When the jazz ended, the MC invited the groom to speak again. Every light swung toward the head table, and Robert shifted slightly in his chair, forcing himself to remain calm. Christopher Sterling stood, his black tuxedo, perfectly cut diamond studs flashing under the lights, microphone in hand. His voice carried with the confidence of someone accustomed to pitching before investment committees. "Ladies and gentlemen, today is not only the day Vanessa and I marry, but the day our two families unite both in affection and in business." A buzz of curiosity swept the room. Christopher glanced around, his eyes pausing on Robert for a heartbeat before sliding away as if Robert were merely a nameless spectator. "Many of you have heard that Hale Dynamics, founded by my father-in-law, once played a role in defense, but times change. Now, under Sterling Capital's leadership, Hale Dynamics will become a new branch within our ecosystem." Applause rose mostly from the Sterling's banker, friends, and partners. Robert sat stunned. A new branch. Christopher had casually erased his life's work, folding it beneath the Sterling name, without a moment's hesitation or respect for the decades of innovation that had built Hale Dynamics. Vanessa sat beside Christopher, nodding and smiling in apparent agreement, even resting her head on her husband's shoulder, pride in her eyes as if to say she had escaped her father's shabby shadow. A man at a nearby table bent toward his wife. "See, I told you, his company is mostly named now. Best to hand it to the Sterlings." His wife giggled and tapped her spoon against her glass in approval. Robert's face burned with quiet fury. Years of radar research, classified contracts, and long nights in naval labs had been collapsed into one dismissive sentence: a branch of Sterling Capital. He glanced toward Marissa, who sat watching the proceedings with cool detachment. When their eyes met, she gave the smallest nod. "Be patient. Not yet." Christopher continued, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "We are proud to bring Hale Dynamics into the family fund. This will be a turning point, a rebirth, and more importantly, it proves Vanessa chose not only the right partner, but the right family with vision." Guests clapped enthusiastically, and several looked at Robert with mingled pity and mockery. He sat straight-backed, hands on his knees, refusing to react. Not at this moment. Everything he carried, the voice memo from Laura, the villa deed, the new will, waited for the perfect moment to be revealed. But inside, anger flared hot and bright. Christopher thought he had humiliated Robert once more, believed Robert would sit still and swallow the insult, never imagining that each clap only fed the moment Robert would finally erupt. Robert lifted his water glass slowly and took a small sip to steady his voice. Laura's words echoed in his head. "Robert, let our daughter learn the value of character." He nodded faintly as if answering his late wife, exhaling slowly. Tonight they wanted to make Hale Dynamics subordinate, fine. But when the truth emerged, both Sterling Capital and Vanessa would understand that some things cannot be bought with power or money. The lights still bathed the head table as Christopher raised his glass to conclude. "Please raise a glass to the glorious future of Sterling and of Hale Dynamics under its new roof." Crystal glasses chimed, and the whole hall rejoiced in what they believed was a brilliant merger of wealth and opportunity. In that moment, as Robert watched his daughter's beaming face, something shifted inside him. The time for silence had ended. The memory of Laura deserved better than this perversion of their shared values. With deliberate calm, Robert stood. Marissa's eyes widened slightly. They had planned for him to wait until after the toast, but she quickly composed herself and gave a barely perceptible nod of support. Robert straightened his modest suit jacket and began walking toward the stage, each step measured and purposeful. The banquet room fell quiet, with only soft background music remaining. Robert felt 180 gazes following him, half eager to see what other farce might come from the poor old man, half shocked by his sudden move. Vanessa pressed her lips together, her fingers trembling on her wineglass, her eyes a mixture of pleading and anger. As he reached the stage, Robert felt the weight of the old iPhone in his pocket, not just a device, but a vessel containing Laura's final wisdom. The stereo system still played softly as he took position at the microphone. Whitman arched an eyebrow. Christopher's mouth tightened into a thin line. Both believed Robert was only thrashing in vain, a desperate old man seeking attention at a celebration that had moved beyond him. Robert drew a deep breath, his eyes fixed on Vanessa. His voice, when it came, surprised even him with its clarity and strength. "You just heard my daughter and her new husband announce plans for my company, a company built through 30 years of innovation and personal sacrifice. But before those plans proceed, there's something everyone in this room should know." The crowd stirred, uncertain whether to be entertained or embarrassed by this unexpected interruption. Robert continued, his voice growing steadier with each word. 8 years ago, I made a promise to my wife Laura on her deathbed. I've kept that promise through silence and sacrifice, watching as my own daughter grew distant, believing falsehoods about her family. Tonight, that silence ends. Vanessa's face drained of color. Christopher stepped forward, one hand reaching for the microphone, but Robert's unwavering gaze stopped him cold. "What you see before you, a man in a modest suit sitting at the back table, is not the complete truth. And since truth matters more than appearance, more than wealth, more than social standing, I feel compelled to share it with you all." Robert reached into his pocket and withdrew the old iPhone. Its scratched screen reflected the chandelier light as he held it up for all to see. "This contains the last words my wife spoke to me before cancer took her. Words about our daughter. words about what she feared Vanessa might become without proper guidance. The ballroom had fallen utterly silent. Even the servers had paused trays balanced motionless as they watched the drama unfold. Robert's finger hovered over the play button, his eyes never leaving Vanessa's face. I had hoped never to need this. I had hoped that the lessons your mother and I tried to teach about integrity, about valuing people over possessions, would eventually find root in your heart. But tonight, as I watch you erase me from your life and hand my life's work to strangers, I realize I've failed her. And in failing her, I've failed you. With that, Robert pressed play. The sound system carried Laura's voice throughout the ballroom, weak but determined, speaking from beyond the grave. Robert, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. I need to say something. I worry about our girl. She is becoming cruel. Last week when the nurse helped me to the bathroom, she asked when I would die so you could be free. I heard every word. She is ashamed of you, ashamed of this family. I am afraid she will trade love for vanity. Gasps rippled through the audience. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and mortification. Laura's voice continued, "Promise me, Robert, do not let money blind her. If one day she uses my death as a pretext to humiliate you, then you must show her the truth. That will be the only lesson that can save her." The recording stopped. The room remained so silent Robert could hear a spoon hit a porcelain plate somewhere in the back. He lifted his head, looking directly at Vanessa. "That is your mother's last wish, and tonight you have forced me to carry it out." The echo of the audio still hung in the air like a winter chill. After a moment, murmurs rose, little waves lapping at the shore of stunned silence. Some guests covered their mouths in shock. Others stared at Vanessa with new eyes. Several raised phones recording every word. Vanessa sprang up before Robert could continue, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. "That's fake." Her voice cracked with desperation. "Dad, you can't do this. Someone edited that file, spliced the voice, staged this. This is a dirty plot to ruin our wedding." Christopher rushed to her side, his face flushing crimson. "Someone is trying to turn this day into a cheap show. Who brings trash like this here? We can check metadata forensics. If you have anything real, give it to an expert. But don't turn this wedding into a stage for hateful lies." A few guests clapped hesitantly, backing Christopher's stance. Whitman growled, "It would be a shame if anyone exploited memories to sow division. Let us remain calm." The room seemed to split in two. The Sterling's crowd, banker friends, club colleagues, looked satisfied, as if public opinion still supported them. Others, more ordinary guests, appeared to lean toward Robert, yet hesitated to show it openly. A middle-aged woman whispered, "Sounds like a trap set in advance." A younger man muttered to his neighbor, "If that's real, it's cruel beyond words." Marissa Cole rose and stepped to the microphone, her gait cool and professional. Her voice cut through the growing murmurs with legal precision. "I am counsel for Mr. Hale. I understand the instinct to react defensively at a wedding, and I fully support everyone's right to question. That's precisely why we came prepared. The audio exists in multiple certified copies, including on the company server and a notarized backup sent to a custodian bank. We are ready for forensic verification immediately if anyone wishes." The room fell into another silence, not shock now, but wary uncertainty. Marissa didn't need to shout or inflame. Her calm professionalism created a back force that made Vanessa's denial seem thin and desperate. Yet doubt still hovered in the air. Vanessa turned to the crowd, eyes blazing red. "They're only doing this to hide the truth. My father lives in delusion. He's just a bitter man who likes to create drama. Please understand." She tried to solicit pity with tears, and many guests swept by emotion, and the bride's shame-filled face seemed to waver. A blogger in the corner phone glowing whispered, "This will trend by midnight. Wedding drama." More phones appeared live streaming, the confrontation, Vanessa crying, Robert standing steady at the microphone, everything instantly becoming social media fodder. Within minutes, the story began spilling beyond the ballroom through quick clips and shocked commentary. Robert felt a shift from private shame to public spectacle. If Vanessa and Christopher stamped fake on the recording before anyone verified it, public opinion could pivot in their favor. They had the advantage of being the first tellers, and in the media landscape, those who speak first often control the narrative. Marissa glanced at Robert, then turned back to the audience, her voice smooth but edged with authority. We will not react emotionally, but I repeat, everything is backed up and verifiable. If anyone wants a forensics expert here now, we stand ready. If they prefer not to argue further at this moment, we can pause and await independent expert results. But we should not rush to conclusions. Whitman cut in, his face hardening. Why wait? They are attacking our family's honor in the middle of this celebration. We will not accept defamation. He lowered his tone, but remained loud enough for nearby tables to hear. We protect the bride. If Mr. Hale has evidence, let him show it. If not, please respect tonight's occasion. His words tugged half the room toward him. The confrontation hung in the air like storm clouds. People who had once pitied Robert now seemed uncertain what to believe. Some filmed Vanessa's pallid face, then scrolled through their phones, likely searching for more context or sharing what they'd witnessed. Robert stood motionless, his heart beating with a new coldness, not hatred but recognition. He had not planned to create a scene. He had only wanted the truth acknowledged. But when a powerful family used this event to force a fake merger and turn his silence into consent, that silence became complicity. And complicity he could not accept. In his jacket pocket, the merger agreement still lay folded, the draft they had sent after Laura's funeral. For years he had hidden it, not wanting to wound Vanessa further, with knowledge of how quickly the Sterlings had tried to capitalize on their family tragedy. Now if they claimed ownership of Hale Dynamics with mere words, he had grounds to present irrefutable evidence. Marissa stepped close and whispered, "Stay calm. I'll bring in an expert to check the file's metadata right after this. When every doubt is cleared, I'll ask the MC for a few more minutes to present the other evidence." Robert nodded almost imperceptibly. The banquet room was no longer whole. It had been split down the middle, one half with the Sterlings, the other cautious, waiting for proof. The wedding night had become a battleground of truth versus appearance, and Robert stood at its center, facing the cold wind of a turning point that would reshape all their lives. The murmurs had barely settled when the MC edged toward the microphone, clearly hoping to close the dispute and return to celebration. But Marissa raised her hand, voice steady. "Excuse me, but to prevent serious misunderstandings from spreading, Mr. Hale has additional documents to clarify ownership matters. When truth concerns both honor and legal rights, transparency becomes necessary." Chandelier light flashed on the file Robert drew from his pocket. He set it on the lectern, hand gripping the paper's edge, eyes fixed on Whitman Sterling. "You have just heard Laura's voice, and if that isn't enough to prove the truth, I will show you something the Sterling family has tried to hide for 8 years. He opened the file to reveal a page stamped with a red notary seal. The deed to real property on Westheimer, Houston, the office building everyone believed belonged to Sterling Capital. Robert lifted it high for all to see. "This is the deed for the building at 40 Westheimer. Current value over $32 million. The lawful owner, Robert Hale. The tenant from 2015 to the present at a nominal $1 per year is Sterling Capital." A wave of confused murmurs rolled through the ballroom. A few derisive laughs punctuated the shock, as if this claim must surely be another desperate fabrication. Robert looked directly at Whitman. "You know this document well because you yourself signed the lease through the county brokerage office. My name was hidden under a trust shell for national security reasons. Every transaction had to remain confidential. I kept silent to save your family's face, and for 8 years you have strutted about claiming it as ancestral property, boasting that Sterling never lost its roots. But the truth differs. An empty barrel makes the loudest noise." Whitman Sterling, blanched lips working without producing sound. Patricia covered her face, a sob breaking through her composure. Christopher gripped his champagne glass until it shattered in his hand, shards tinkling to the floor unnoticed. Vanessa screamed, her voice shrill with panic. "Dad, why are you doing this? Why humiliate me in front of everyone? This is my wedding day." Robert met her eyes, his voice low but iron strong. "No, Vanessa. This is the day you chose to bury your father's honor to flatter a family that built a castle on sand. You turned your mother's memory into a tool of humiliation, and you yourself forced me to speak the truth. No one in this room, including you, has the right to deny it." The hall stirred, chairs pivoting toward Robert. A young guest, clearly not aligned with the Sterling camp, began to clap. Then another joined. The applause spread like sparks catching dry timber. Many didn't necessarily support Robert personally, but the truth now glowed on their phone screens and could not be denied. Marissa murmured, "Do you still have the merger agreement?" Robert nodded. One more piece of evidence remained, and he knew exactly when to present it. At this moment, the balance in the room had already shifted. The Sterlings were no longer the family at the center of admiration. They had become the eye of the storm under every gaze. Robert stepped back from the lectern, leaving the deed on the microphone stand. It wasn't merely a sheet of paper, it was proof of 8 years of silence, the sign that the undertow had finally broken surface. The scattered applause continued through the room, but Robert knew he couldn't stop here. The Sterlings were accustomed to papering over scandals, and if he didn't take one more decisive step, they would claw back their narrative advantage by morning. Marissa gave a small nod as if to say, "It's time." Robert returned to the lectern and withdrew from the file a thick sheath of papers clipped with bright steel. He lifted it high so everyone could see the Sterling Capital logo emblazoned across the top page. This is not only real estate paperwork. This is proof the Sterling family attempted to seize Hale Dynamics, the company I built with my bare hands, while I was still mourning my wife. The room fell dead silent. Robert opened to the first page where bold letters read, "Merger Agreement," under the Sterling Capital letterhead. The company seal bright red at the bottom. This contract was sent to me only 4 weeks after Laura's funeral. You can see the blank where my signature would go while Sterling's ought is pre-signed. The contents would transfer all control of Hale Dynamics to Sterling Capital under the label of a voluntary merger. In return, I would receive an annual stipend of $200,000, a pittance beside the tens of millions the company generates each year. Robert turned the page and read slowly, allowing each word to sink into the stunned audience. Section 7.1. After signing, Mr. Robert Hale shall withdraw from all managerial activities. Section 7.2. Mr. Robert Hale shall no longer have the right to speak publicly about the company's history. Section 8.4. All statements and publications related to Hale Dynamics must read a company of Sterling Capital. Angry murmurs erupted. Several guest engineers who had worked with Robert in the past exclaimed in outrage. Good grief, and they dared call that a mutually beneficial merger. Whitman lurched to his feet, face crimson. Enough, that is only an internal draft with no legal force. You cannot parade it here to slander us. Robert looked straight at him, voice low and deliberate. Whitman Sterling, you signed this while I was kneeling at my wife's grave. You saw me sell our house and strip assets assumed I was spent and broken. You sought to exploit mourning to swallow Hale Dynamics for pennies to turn it into a trinket in Sterling's portfolio. For 8 years, your family kept boasting of the bond between Hale and Sterling, when the truth is I never signed. Robert held up the last page toward the hall. Under the chandeliers, Whitman Sterling Jr.'s shaky signature showed clearly for all to see. A collective gasp swept the room. More phones appeared, more live streams captured the moment legacy became infamy. Marissa stepped forward, voice cold as steel. We have verified this contract's authenticity through an independent notary. If anyone doubts, you can check it tomorrow morning at the Harris County office. This document is lawful and admissible in court. Christopher lunged toward the microphone, shouting, "My father only signed provisionally." He didn't understand the terms. This is a smear tactic, Robert answered without raising his voice like a judge reading a sentence. No, Christopher, your father understood perfectly. He signed because he thought I was cleaned out and that a few lines would let him swallow my company whole. He miscalculated one thing. I would rather be thought poor by the world than sell my legacy cheap. The hall exploded into chaos. Jeers aimed at the Sterling table rang out. How shameless, exploiting a funeral, not a shred of decency left. Patricia burst into sobs, face buried in a napkin. Vanessa shook visibly, lips moving without producing sound. Christopher slammed another wine glass to the floor shards, skittering across the polished surface. But no one seemed to care. Robert folded the contract carefully, set it neatly on the lectern, and looked around the room, his voice steady and clear above the uproar. You ask why I had to reveal this here tonight, because only hours ago, Christopher Sterling declared that Hale Dynamics is now part of Sterling Capital. If I said nothing, my silence would be taken as consent, and consenting to a lie is something I will never accept. Thunderous applause erupted, not scattered this time, but unified. Half the room rose to their feet, heels struck the floor in rhythm with clapping hands, shouts of, "That's right! mingling with a storm of camera shutters. The tide had turned completely. The Sterlings were now mannequins at the eye of the storm, stripped bare before the public that had once admired them. The room was still roaring when Robert tapped the microphone for silence. Fury was boiling over, but he needed absolute quiet for the final revelation. Gradually, the noise subsided as guests realized Robert had more to say. He slowly drew his phone from his inner pocket, the screen glowing blue, turned it toward the hall, and spoke in a level voice. "You have seen proof the Sterlings tried to swallow my company for pennies. Now to conclude, I will show you another truth, what the so-called penniless old man actually holds." He opened the banking app and enlarged the balance's digits blazing under the lights. Chase Bank personal account 33 $412,000. Wells Fargo investment portfolio $41 to $860,000. Total more than $75 million in liquid funds. The murmur cracked like thunder. Guests clapped hands to their mouths in shock. Many raised phones to capture the screen. At the Sterling table, Christopher stood rooted, face flushed with rage and shame. Patricia sobbed openly. Vanessa stepped back, staring at Robert as if seeing a stranger. Robert continued calmly, as if reading an annual report. "You may ask why. If I am wealthy, I lived 8 years in a small apartment, drove an old Camry, ate at a diner. The answer is simple. I followed Laura's last wish. She wanted our daughter to learn the value of character, not of a credit card. I let the girl believe her father was poor so she would learn to stand on her own feet." He scrolled to an Excel spreadsheet listing payment after payment. "For 8 years, I quietly paid $87,000 in student loans, $43,000 in credit card debt, $91,000 in rent, in apartment deposits, $26,000 for the BMW X5 she drives every day. Total $247,000. All anonymous transfers she never imagined came from her father." "Oh my God," burst from table 6, spreading into a wave of whispers. Half the room shook their heads in disbelief. The other half looked at Vanessa with a mixture of pity and judgment. Vanessa sobbed openly, hands trembling. "Dad, why did you hide this from me all this time? I thought—" Robert cut in a closing verdict in his voice. "You thought your father was helpless, that your mother died in shame, that you needed a rich family to replace us. You used words to kill the memory of a decent woman. Tonight I cannot allow that lie to live." Christopher stepped forward, growling. "You're just smearing my wife and wrecking this wedding," Marissa answered, voice glacial. "You should be careful. Everything Mr. Hale presented tonight is preserved in video, audio, and notarized documents. If you dare call it fabricated, we are ready to meet at federal court." The hall erupted again. Cheers and shouts of "Bravo" punctuated the chaos. The crowd's eyes no longer wavered. The scales had snapped. The Sterlings stood exposed, their carefully constructed image shattered beyond repair. Robert looked at Vanessa one last time, eyes blurred with unshed tears, but voice steady. "My daughter, I once tried to protect you with silence, but tonight you forced me to teach you another lesson. The truth cannot be buried under a wedding dress or drowned out by lavish music. It will always rise, and when it rises, it washes away every falsehood." Vanessa collapsed into a chair, her sobs drowning out the background music. Christopher backed away, face pale, all swagger vanished. Whitman stood frozen, staring at the contract on the lectern with glassy eyes. Robert closed his phone and slid it into his vest pocket. Around him, applause continued, no longer hesitant, but certain, the sound of judgment rendered. This wedding had become a public reckoning, and the verdict was unmistakable. As Robert stepped from the microphone, Marissa at his side, the crowd parted before him. Faces that hours earlier had ignored him now watched with respect and wonder. He walked tall despite his years, a man who had reclaimed not just his company and reputation, but his dignity. Outside the ballroom, the night air felt clean and fresh after the stifling atmosphere inside. Robert looked up at the stars over Houston, thinking of Laura and hoping she would approve of what he had done, not in vengeance but in truth. Not to hurt their daughter, but to save her from the person she was becoming. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, legal battles, public scrutiny, perhaps attempts at reconciliation. But tonight, for the first time in 8 years, Robert Hale would sleep without the weight of secrets pressing on his chest. Truth had a price, but silence had cost far more. 3 months later, I sat at my workbench in the basement, carefully sanding the curved back of a rocking chair I'd been building for weeks. The rhythmic motion had always calmed me, helped me think. Sawdust caught in beams of afternoon light filtering through the small window. My phone vibrated on the workbench, interrupting the quiet. A text from Kate. Signed divorce papers today. No emotion, just 5 words that confirmed what I'd suspected was coming. I hadn't heard from her since that Sunday in March when she'd come to my house with red-rimmed eyes. 94 days of silence. I'd marked each one on my workshop calendar, considered calling dozens of times, but always set the phone down. Some distances needed to be crossed willingly or not at all. The Massachusetts Securities Division had released their full investigation findings the previous week. The Boston Globe ran a front-page article in the business section. Horizon Tech CEO Michael Brooks faces fraud charges. The authorities had uncovered evidence of deliberate financial misrepresentation beyond even what I'd found: falsified client contracts, manipulated demo software presented as proprietary technology, investor funds redirected to personal accounts. Criminal charges were being considered. I blew sawdust from the chair's arm, ran my fingers along the grain to feel for imperfections. My phone vibrated again. "Can I come over tomorrow?" My heart lurched. I texted back a single word: anytime. That night, sleep proved elusive. I stood at my bedroom window looking at the half moon hanging over my quiet street. The trees were just beginning to bud, promising renewal after a particularly harsh winter. I thought about Kate as a little girl, how she'd climb into my lap during thunderstorms, trusting me completely to keep her safe. I wondered when I'd lost that trust, or if I'd broken it myself with what I'd done to Michael. Saturday morning arrived with unexpected warmth. I spent the early hours in the garden Susan had once loved, clearing winter debris, making space for new growth. At 10 o'clock, Kate's silver Audi pulled into my driveway, a car purchased during better financial times before Michael's world collapsed. She stepped out looking thinner than I remembered, dark circles shadowing her eyes. She carried a cardboard box. In my kitchen, she set the box on the table and pulled out a folder of legal documents. "My lawyer says I'm lucky. The investors aren't coming after me personally since my name wasn't on any company documents. Michael kept me separate from the business." Her voice sounded hollow, practiced. "But everything else is gone. The condo, the savings, even my reputation in marketing circles. Nobody wants to hire someone connected to a financial fraud scandal." The weight of consequence hung in the air between us. I'd never intended my actions to hurt Kate, only Michael. But the blast radius of justice rarely stays contained. I've been sleeping on Jen's couch for 2 months. I finally found a tiny apartment in Somerville. It's modest. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She'd returned to the kind of life she'd been so desperate to escape, the life Michael had mocked. I watched her unpack more items from the box: a framed photo of us from her college graduation, a wooden music box I'd made for her 16th birthday, small treasures from a life before Michael. "When did you know?" Kate finally looked directly at me. "When did you first suspect something was wrong with Horizon?" "The first night I met him," I admitted. "Not the financial specifics, but the character behind them. People who need to diminish others are usually compensating for something. The numbers just confirmed what his behavior suggested." Kate nodded slowly. "The SEC investigator asked me how I could have missed the warning signs. I've asked myself the same question every night." Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her belongings on the table. "I have an MBA from Harvard. I should have seen it." "We don't see clearly when we're in love," I offered, "or when we want something badly enough." "What I wanted," Kate's voice faltered, "what I thought I wanted was the life his parents had. The security, the elegance, a life where nobody would ever look down on me for where I came from." The painful truth hung between us: in pursuing that life, she had become the very person who looked down on her origins on me. 2 weeks after the wedding, before everything fell apart, Elizabeth invited me to lunch with her charity board friends. I wore my nicest dress, the pearl necklace Michael bought me for Christmas. Kate's bitter laugh held no humor. They spent the entire meal talking about their household staff, their summer homes, their children's private school connections. I kept thinking how desperately I wanted them to accept me and how empty the conversation was. That was the first time I wondered if I'd made a mistake. The realization had come too late. By then, the wheels of consequence were already turning, set in motion by my email to the authorities. My actions had accelerated her disillusionment, but the marriage had been built on an unstable foundation. Michael's lies, Kate's aspirations, mutual pretense. "I've been offered a bomb," Kate said suddenly. "Nothing glamorous. Assistant marketing manager at a nonprofit. It pays $42,000. The salary she'd once have considered beneath her now represented salvation. "I start Monday." I nodded, feeling an unexpected surge of pride. "You'll rebuild." "That's not why I'm here." Kate pulled one last item from the box, a thick manila envelope. "Last week I went through the storage unit where we kept Michael's home office boxes after downsizing to the condo. I found something I think you should see." She spread the contents across my kitchen table. Printouts of emails between Michael and a private investigator dated 2 weeks after our first dinner together. Bank statements showing payments to someone named Davis Investigations. Detailed reports on my finances, employment history, personal habits. Photos of me leaving school, shopping at the hardware store, even working in my garden. "He had you investigated." The realization hit like a physical blow. Michael hadn't simply judged me as inadequate, he'd actively sought ammunition. Kate's eyes were steady now, anger replacing hurt. He was looking for weaknesses, something he could use if you ever became inconvenient. "The investigator found your background in quality control and engineering. Michael knew you weren't just a shop teacher. He knew exactly who he was insulting at that gala." The calculated nature of the insult somehow made it worse. Michael's contempt hadn't been casual. It had been deliberate, informed, a power play executed with full awareness. Kate wasn't finished. She pulled out a final document, a prenuptial agreement I hadn't known existed. "Look at Section 12. She pointed to a clause specifying that in case of divorce, if Kate's father interfered in Brooks' family business interests, she would forfeit all community property and financial considerations. "He made me sign this the week before the wedding. Said his parents insisted." Kate's voice was barely audible. I asked what constituted interference. He laughed and said I shouldn't worry about it unless you were planning to cause problems. A trap set in legal language, anticipating exactly what had happened. Michael had foreseen the possibility that I might discover his fraudulent practices, had taken precautions to ensure Kate would suffer if I acted. I'd walked right into it, believing I was only hurting him. "The clause is unenforceable," Kate continued. "My divorce attorney said it's unconscionably vague and possibly coercive, but it shows his intent, his character. He viewed me as collateral, a way to control you if necessary." The full weight of the situation settled on me. Michael hadn't just been dishonest in business, he'd approached his marriage with the same calculating dishonesty. Kate hadn't been a partner, she'd been an acquisition, a shield, a tool. "I'm sorry," I offered, the words wholly inadequate. Kate gathered the documents, returning them to the envelope. "I'm not asking for an apology. I made my choices. But I wanted you to understand that what you exposed wasn't just financial fraud. It was who he is at his core." She straightened her shoulders slightly. "And I wanted you to know that I see it now. All of it." That afternoon, we began the slow work of rebuilding. Kate helped me in this garden, remembering where Susan had always planted the tomatoes, which corner got the best sunlight for herbs. We ordered pizza and ate it on the back porch, talking about her new job, my students, neutral territory, where we could meet as adults without reopening wounds still fresh. When she left, the hug she gave me felt different, not the obligation of a daughter to a father, but the gesture of one survivor to another. "I'll call you next week," she promised. This time I believed her. Monday morning found me back at West Ridge Technical High, facing 24 juniors in my woodshop class. Among them sat Marcus, the foster kid with natural talent I'd been mentoring. He'd completed his jewelry box project for his foster mother, dovetail joints, perfect finish, immaculate. Now he was sketching designs for a desk he wanted to build, showing ambition beyond his years. "If I sell it, could I make another?" His question carried cautious hope. "My foster dad says I could set up a small business. I can show it makes money." "Craftsmanship always has value," I replied, examining his design. "But it requires patience and absolute honesty about what you can deliver." The lesson felt personal, now weighted with recent experience. Build with integrity and the work speaks for itself. After school, Principal Goodwin called me into his office, a rare occurrence that usually signaled trouble. I found him reviewing a proposal document, reading glasses perched on his nose. "Carter, you know anything about this?" He slid the paper across his desk. State education grant application requesting funds for an expanded technical education program. Horizon Technical Skills Initiative designed to provide advanced training for students seeking trades careers. First I'm hearing of it, I admitted, skimming the document. Well, someone thinks highly of your program. The state's looking to fund vocational education that leads directly to employment. They reached out to us specifically because of your placement rate. Goodwin leaned back in his chair. 92% of your students find apprenticeships or entry-level positions within 6 months of graduation. Did you know that I hadn't known the exact figure? I'd simply focused on teaching skills that had real-world application, connecting students with industry contacts I'd built over decades. Keeping records hadn't seemed important. They want to use Westridge as a pilot program. Double your classroom, space update equipment, add certification courses. Goodwin removed his glasses. They're asking if you'd be willing to design the curriculum. Would include a salary bump, of course. The opportunity felt like vindication. While Michael's empire of deception had crumbled, my quiet work of 3 decades had been noticed valued. I thought of all the students like Marcus who could benefit. I'd be honored, I said simply. Spring flowed into summer. Kate called weekly, came for dinner every other Sunday. She'd settled into her apartment and her new job with a determination I recognized. The nonprofit worked with homeless veterans, providing housing assistance and job training. Her marketing skills were being used for something meaningful rather than just profitable. One Sunday in July, she arrived with unexpected news. I've been contacted by 3 of Michael's former investors, she said, setting down her purse. They want my help. My protective instincts flared immediately. What kind of help? They're starting a fund to invest in legitimate tech startups with solid fundamentals. No flash, no exaggerated promises. They want me to develop guidelines for spotting dishonest pitches, warning signs, and business plans. A small, satisfied smile crossed her face. Apparently, having been married to a fraud gives me valuable perspective. Are you considering it? I already said yes. Kate poured herself iced tea from the pitcher in my refrigerator. It's consulting work, pays well, and might actually prevent someone else from being deceived the way I was. She'd found a way to transform her painful experience into something useful. I recognized the impulse. It was how I'd approached teaching all these years, using my engineering background to help students avoid pitfalls I'd seen in industry. They're calling it the Integrity Fund, Kate added. One of the partners suggested I reach out to you too, said they could use someone with your analytical skills and experience in spotting structural weaknesses. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The very skills Michael had mocked might now help prevent others from falling victim to similar schemes. I promised to consider it. The following week brought unexpected consequences. A reporter from the Boston Globe requested an interview about the vocational education grant. The resulting article, From Workshop to Workforce: How One Teacher's Approach is Reshaping Technical Education, appeared on a Sunday, complete with photos of my classroom and quotes from former students now running successful businesses. Monday morning, my phone rang before dawn. Martin Thompson, my old colleague from the engineering firm, who'd first confirmed my suspicions about Horizon. Tell me you didn't do it, he demanded without preamble. Do what? The SEC investigation into Horizon. The anonymous tip that started everything. Please tell me that wasn't you. I said nothing, which was answer enough. Martin exhaled slowly. Bill, the financial community is smaller than you think. People talk. There's speculation about who brought Brooks down, and your name has come up, especially after yesterday's article about your engineering background. And they can't prove anything, I replied, feeling the first stirrings of unease. That's not the point. Brooks still has connections. Powerful friends who lost money when Horizon collapsed. They're looking for someone to blame besides him. Martin's voice dropped lower. Watch your back and check your credit report, your bank accounts. These people play rough. The warning proved prescient. That afternoon, the school secretary transferred a call to my classroom phone, a local bank, where I'd never had an account, questioning a loan application submitted in my name that morning. Identity theft, the first salvo in what would become a campaign of harassment. By week's end, my credit score had plummeted due to multiple fraudulent applications. My home email was flooded with subscriptions I'd never requested. Pizza deliveries arrived at my house at 3 a.m. Small, petty attacks designed to disrupt rather than destroy. I reported everything to the police, installed security cameras around my house, and waited for the next move. It came through Kate, of course. Her new boss called her into his office, looking uncomfortable. Someone from the Brooks Foundation contacted our biggest donor, he explained, suggested they might want to reconsider supporting an organization that employs the daughter of a man who, quote, maliciously destroyed a promising Boston tech company out of personal jealousy. The foundation was run by Elizabeth Brooks. Michael's mother had found a way to strike at Kate's newfound stability. The donor fortunately had dismissed the suggestion, but the message was clear. The Brooks family knew, or at least strongly suspected, and they weren't finished. Kate brought this news to my house that evening, worried but resolute. They can't touch the nonprofit without hurting the veterans we serve. Even Elizabeth isn't that heartless. Don't underestimate people who feel entitled to retaliation, I cautioned. Michael didn't develop his character in a vacuum. We were discussing security measures when headlights swept across my living room window. A car pulling into my driveway, engine shutting off. Kate peered through the blinds, then stepped back in shock. It's Michael. He stood on my porch in the gathering dusk, a diminished version of the confident entrepreneur who had once mocked me. His expensive suit had been replaced by department store business casual. The designer watch was gone. Even his posture had changed, shoulders slightly hunched, the unconscious defensive stance of someone accustomed to recent defeat. I opened the door before he could knock. His eyes widened slightly at seeing Kate behind me, clearly not expecting her presence. We need to talk, Michael stated flatly. All three of us. In my living room, he declined a seat, remaining standing like a man prepared to make a quick exit. I know what you did, he addressed me directly. The anonymous complaint to the securities division. Very clever using a VPN, but they shared the technical evidence with my lawyers during discovery. The complaint came from this neighborhood on the night of the gala. I said nothing, neither confirming nor denying. Kate moved to stand beside me, a silent declaration of allegiance that didn't escape Michael's notice. I'm not here for revenge, he continued, though God knows I'd be entitled. I'm here to make a deal. What kind of deal could you possibly offer? Kate's voice held nothing but contempt. Information for information. Michael ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd never seen before. Richard and Elizabeth aren't just angry about losing status and money. They're scared. The foundation's finances are being scrutinized now because of my case. There are irregularities. The Brooks family's pristine facade was cracking. The investigation into Horizon had apparently opened doors the elder Brooks would have preferred remain closed. My father convinced me to take certain actions with Horizon's accounts, Michael admitted, strategies he'd used for years with the foundation. I didn't invent the accounting methods, I inherited them. You're throwing your father under the bus. Kate's disgust was palpable. I'm trying to save myself from federal prison, Michael snapped. The prosecutors are offering a deal if I cooperate against bigger fish. My parents qualify. The full picture emerged gradually. Richard Brooks had been using the family's charitable foundation for tax evasion and self-dealing for over a decade. He'd taught Michael the same techniques, encouraging him to apply them to Horizon. Now federal investigators were connecting dots between father and son, building a larger case. Here's my offer, Michael said, addressing me directly. I tell the prosecutors I acted alone with Horizon. No mention of Richard's advice or foundation connections. In exchange, you tell me exactly what evidence you gathered and how you obtained it so I can protect myself from any potential illegalities in your methods. He thought I'd broken laws to expose him, was offering a mutual protection pact. The desperation in his eyes told the real story. He was still hoping to salvage something from his relationship with his parents, still seeking their approval despite everything. There's nothing illegal about noticing fraud and reporting it to authorities, I replied calmly. I have nothing to hide. Michael's facade cracked further. You deliberately targeted me because I insulted you. Don't pretend this was some noble act of consumer protection. You're right, I acknowledged, surprising him. I looked into your company because you belittled me and my profession. But what I found was real. I didn't fabricate evidence. I didn't plant false information. The fraud was all yours. My father will lose everything. Michael's voice had lost its edge, revealing the scared child beneath. Mother too. Actions have consequences, Kate interjected. Isn't that what you always said about real entrepreneurship? Taking risks means accepting potential losses. Michael turned to her, seeing perhaps for the first time the woman she'd become in his absence. I never meant to hurt you, Kate. You were supposed to be protected. Protected? Her laugh held no humor. You used me as insurance against my father. That prenup clause about interference, I found it, Michael. I know exactly what you were doing. Color drained from his face. That was my father's idea. Standard procedure, he said. Of course it was, Kate replied. The Brooks family approach to relationships, everyone's a potential asset or liability to be managed. Michael looked between us, recognition dawning that there would be no deal, no mutual protection. You've already won, he said bitterly. My career is over. My reputation is destroyed. What more do you want? I studied him carefully, this man who had once held my daughter's heart, who had nearly become family. Despite everything, I felt an unexpected flicker of pity. I don't want anything from you, Michael. I never did. I simply wanted respect, not admiration, just basic human respect. Well, I hope it was worth it, he replied, moving toward the door. The prosecutors have my final statement tomorrow morning. I'll be making decisions about my future and the future of my family. After he left, Kate and I sat in silence, absorbing what had transpired. He's going to protect his parents, she finally said, even now after everything. Some patterns are hard to break, I observed. He still craves their approval. The following week brought news via the Boston Globe. Michael Brooks had accepted a plea deal admitting to securities fraud while maintaining he had acted alone. He would serve 18 months in a minimum security facility, followed by 3 years of probation. Richard and Elizabeth Brooks announced they were closing their family foundation and relocating to Florida. Kate and I followed the news together over dinner at my house, a new Sunday tradition we'd established. I feel sorry for him in a way, she admitted. He'll never be free of them, even now. We're all shaped by our upbringing, I replied. The difference is whether we recognize those patterns and work to change them. Kate nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about patterns too. How I was so desperate to escape what I saw as a limited life that I almost lost the most valuable things in it. She reached across the table to take my hand. I'm sorry, Dad, not just for not defending you, but for ever being ashamed of where I came from. The apology meant more than she could know. Not because I needed to hear it, but because it represented her own healing, her reclamation of values that had temporarily been buried beneath ambition and insecurity. I've applied to teach a marketing course at Bunker Hill Community College, Kate announced. Just one evening class to start. Practical skills for small business owners. It doesn't pay much, but it matters, I finished for her. Yeah, her smile reminded me of Susan. It matters. Summer faded into fall. My expanded vocational program at Westridge Technical launched with 42 students, including 6 young women, a record for technical education at our school. Marcus had become something of a teaching assistant, helping newer students master basic skills while developing his own furniture-making business with my guidance. Kate's consulting work with the Integrity Fund had expanded to include educational workshops for potential investors. She'd moved to a slightly larger apartment, begun dating casually, and seemed genuinely content with her recalibrated life. The wounds inflicted by Michael's betrayal were healing, though scars remained. One crisp October evening, almost exactly a year after the gala, where everything had begun to unravel, Kate arrived at my house with an unexpected proposal. The fund wants to establish a scholarship, she explained over coffee at my kitchen table, for students pursuing vocational education after high school. They've asked if we could name it after you. The William Carter Excellence in Craftsmanship Scholarship would provide full tuition and tools for 2 graduating seniors each year, with preference given to students from disadvantaged backgrounds. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, Michael's former investors funding the very educational path he had dismissed as failure. Life takes unexpected turns, I observed, considering the offer. Kate's smile held new wisdom. Sometimes the longest route leads exactly where you needed to go. That weekend, we worked together in my workshop, building a display cabinet for her apartment. I showed her how to cut perfect joints, how to bring out the grain with proper finishing techniques. Her hands were tentative at first, but gained confidence with each step. The legacy of craft passing between generations, bridging the gap that had once threatened to separate us permanently. As the afternoon light filtered through sawdust in the air, Kate looked up from her work. You know what I realized recently? Michael always talked about building things, but he never actually created anything real. It was all projections and promises and PowerPoint slides. She ran her fingers along the wood we were shaping. This is real. What you've built all these years with your hands, with your students. It's tangible. It lasts. In that moment, I understood that the true victory wasn't exposing Michael's fraud or even vindicating my profession. It was this reconciliation, this recognition that value isn't measured in dollar signs or status symbols, but in work done with integrity and relationships that withstand testing. There's an old woodworker's saying, I told her, the quality of your work reflects the quality of your character. Shortcuts show eventually. Kate nodded thoughtfully. I wish I'd understood that sooner. You understand it now, I replied. That's what matters. 6 months after the wedding that became a courtroom, morning sunlight filtered through new curtains in Robert Hale's high-rise Austin condominium. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline so different from the limited view of his former apartment. The space reflected his true financial status, now spacious, but not ostentatious quality furniture chosen for comfort rather than show. No gilded fixtures or crystal chandeliers, just honest craftsmanship and thoughtful design. Robert sipped coffee from a handmade ceramic mug, a gift from a former Hale Dynamics engineer who'd reached out after the revelation. The past 6 months had brought hundreds of such reconnections, colleagues from decades past, the neighbors from their old Austin neighborhood, Laura's teaching friends. People who'd lost touch during his years of self-imposed austerity, now eager to share memories of the woman whose dying wish had shaped so many lives. His phone chimed with a calendar alert, Laura Hale Memorial Foundation, opening ceremony 11:00 a.m. 6 months of careful planning culminating today. Robert had worked closely with Maria and a team of advisors to structure the foundation properly. His investment principle remained intact, but the annual returns, several $1 million, would fund breast cancer research, treatment, assistance for patients without insurance, and scholarships for medical students specializing in oncology. A living tribute to Laura that transformed their personal tragedy into hope for others. The transition from hidden millionaire to public philanthropist had not been seamless. For weeks after the wedding, reporters had camped outside his old apartment, forcing him to stay with Maria's family briefly. Financial publications ran profiles examining his business history, digging into how Hale Dynamics had secured that crucial naval radar contract. Social media continued recycling clips from the wedding confrontation with commentators, dissecting every expression, every word. Robert had declined all interview requests, letting the documentation speak for itself. Sterling Capital had not fared as well under scrutiny. The stock never recovered from its initial plunge, and a subsequent SEC investigation into their reporting practices revealed concerning patterns. Christopher had abandoned his position as heir apparent, accepting a managing director role at a rival firm in Chicago. The annulment from Vanessa had been granted with unusual speed, both parties eager to erase their brief union from legal records, if not from public memory. Whitman had survived his cardiac event, but emerged diminished physically and professionally. Control of Sterling Capital passed to a board-appointed CEO tasked with rebuilding investor confidence. The empire didn't collapse entirely, but its foundations had cracked irreparably. The family name, once synonymous with banking excellence in Texas, now carried an asterisk of scandal. Robert finished his coffee and moved to the closet, selecting a suit far better tailored than the $200 wedding attire, but still conservative in style. No designer labels or flashy accessories. The man who'd sat forgotten at table 14 might have new clothes, but his values remained unchanged. A text message appeared on his phone. Landed safely, heading to hotel first, then ceremony. See you there, my V. 6 simple words that had taken 6 months to materialize. Vanessa's self-imposed exile in Denver had stretched from weeks to months, her occasional messages growing more reflective, but never quite reaching the point of reconciliation. This morning's text marked her first return to Austin since the wedding. Not a homecoming exactly, but a step across the chasm that had opened between them. The Memorial Center occupied the former site of Austin Regional Hospital's East Wing, where Laura had spent her final weeks. The hospital had eagerly partnered with the foundation, recognizing the publicity and funding benefits. Robert had insisted on one condition: the treatment rooms must have windows. Laura's hospital room had been interior windowless except for a small rectangle in the door. She'd missed seeing the sky during those critical days. Robert arrived early, walking the gleaming hallways alone before others gathered. The construction team had completed everything on schedule: research laboratories, consultation rooms, a sunny atrium where patients could sit with families during treatment, photographs of Texas wildflowers. Laura's favorite subject to photograph lined the corridors, not the sterile corporate art artwork typical of medical facilities, but vibrant images capturing life's persistence. Maria found him in the atrium, her usual professional demeanor softened by genuine excitement. The mayor just arrived along with 3 state representatives. Local news stations are setting up outside. And the first scholarship recipients are here: 5 medical students, all focusing on cancer research. You should meet them before the ceremony. Robert nodded, following her toward the entrance where a small group of young people waited, earnest and nervous, in their best clothes. He shook each hand, asked about their specialties, watched their initial awe at meeting the founder dissolve into enthusiastic descriptions of research goals. These bright minds represented what the foundation was truly about: not memorializing loss, but cultivating hope. As the atrium filled with guests, Robert scanned faces, automatically searching for Vanessa. Would she look different after 6 months? Would Denver's cooler climate have changed her Houston polish? The crowd continued to grow. Hospital administrators, local dignitaries, researchers, excited about new facilities, but no sign of his daughter. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes when Maria touched his arm lightly. She's here. Back entrance. I think she wanted to avoid the media. Robert excused himself from a conversation with the hospital director and made his way through a service corridor. Stepping through a staff doorway, he found Vanessa standing alone beside a newly planted oak tree in the memorial garden. The changes were subtle but significant. Her hair, once highlighted and precisely styled, now fell in simpler waves around her shoulders. The designer clothes had been replaced with a well-made but modest navy dress. The diamond earrings and bracelets, sterling gifts, were gone, replaced by a single strand of pearls that had been Laura's. You came. Robert stopped several feet away, respecting the careful distance in her posture. Vanessa nodded, her fingers tracing the small plaque beside the oak. Mom loved trees. She used to say they were the perfect metaphor for a good life, growing steadily, bending with the storms, but never breaking, providing shelter for others. The memory surfaced in Robert's mind with perfect clarity. Cora on their back porch in Austin, watching a thunderstorm bend the old oak in their yard, making that exact observation while cradling a much younger Vanessa on her lap. He hadn't realized his daughter had kept that moment too, had carried Laura's wisdom through the intervening years. I wasn't sure you'd come back for this. Robert kept his voice neutral, neither pressuring nor accusing. Vanessa's shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly. I needed to be here. For her. And for myself. She turned to face him fully. Denver gave me space to think. To separate who I am from who I was trying to become. 6 months of self-reflection lay between them, a period of metamorphosis neither could fully explain to the other. Robert had transformed from hidden millionaire to public philanthropist. Vanessa had journeyed from social climbing sterling bride to, a woman standing on her own 2 feet by the look of her. Someone finding her way back to authenticity after years of performance. I have something for you. Robert reached into a suit pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. I found it while moving into the new place. Vanessa accepted the pouch, cautiously loosening the drawstring to reveal a tarnished silver locket. Her breath caught. Mom's hiking necklace. She lifted it carefully, the oval pendant swinging gently. I thought this was lost during the move after she died. It fell behind her jewelry box. I found it when I was packing up the apartment. Robert watched as Vanessa opened the locket, revealing the tiny photograph inside, the 3 of them on a camping trip, laughing by a lakeside fire. She was wearing it in the hospital until the final week when the nurses removed all her jewelry. I meant to give it to you years ago, but the distance between them had grown too vast. But he'd feared she might sell it during her sterling courtship phase. But some gifts can only be given when the recipient is ready to understand their value. Vanessa closed the locket, clutching it tightly. Thank you. Simple words carrying the weight of shared history. The garden door opened, Maria appearing with apologetic urgency. 2 minutes until the ceremony starts. They're waiting for both of you. Robert nodded, then turned to Vanessa. Will you join me on the stage? You don't have to speak. Just be present, as Laura's daughter. A moment's hesitation crossed her face, media exposure, public scrutiny, the questions that would inevitably follow. Then resolution. Yes, but as your daughter too. The ceremony proceeded with dignified simplicity. Robert kept his remarks brief, focusing on the foundation's mission rather than personal history. He thanked the hospital partnership team, the architects who'd designed the space, the medical advisors who'd helped structure the research for priorities. Throughout, Vanessa sat beside him, composed and attentive, the silver locket now fastened around her neck. When Robert introduced the scholarship recipients, genuine pride warmed his voice. Laura believed education was the most powerful force for positive change. These young doctors represent her legacy as surely as any building or program. Their work will touch thousands of lives in ways we cannot yet imagine. Afterward, during the reception, Vanessa stayed close but maintained her independence, engaging thoughtfully with guests rather than clinging to Robert's side. He watched from across the atrium as she spoke with one of the scholarship recipients, her animated gestures reminiscent of Laura's passionate teaching style. Something long dormant was reawakening in her, a quality that had been overshadowed during her years climbing Houston's social ladder. As the crowd thinned, Vanessa approached Robert, 2 glasses of sparkling water in hand. The oncology director mentioned Mom's research participation. I didn't know she donated tissue samples for the longitudinal study. Robert accepted the water gratefully. She insisted even when she could barely sign the forms, said if her experience couldn't save her, it might still help someone else. He paused, weighing whether to continue. That's why I established this place. Not just to honor her memory, but to fulfill that intention. Vanessa nodded slowly. I've been volunteering at a cancer support center in Denver. Just administrative work, nothing medical. But being around the patients, seeing their courage, it's helped me understand her better. And you. The admission hung between them, not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement of growth. 6 months ago, Vanessa had stormed out of Maria's office wounded and angry, declaring Robert had destroyed her life. Now she stood beside him, changed by the same truth that had sparked that destruction. Maria approached with the foundation's executive director, drawing Robert into a discussion about quarterly funding disbursements. By the time he looked up again, Vanessa had moved to the atrium's massive windows, gazing out at the Austin skyline as afternoon shadows lengthened across the city. The reception concluded with handshakes and promises of continued partnership. As the last guest departed, Robert found Vanessa still by the windows, her reflection ghost-like against the darkening glass. I was thinking about table 14, she said without turning. How isolated you looked. How satisfied I felt seeing you there, as if your position confirmed everything I believed about our family story. Robert joined her at the window, careful to maintain a respectful distance. We create narratives that justify our choices. I did the same thing, telling myself my silence was protecting you when perhaps it was also protecting me from difficult conversations. Vanessa's reflection smiled faintly. Denver has good therapists. I've been doing a lot of work on my issues. She hesitated. Mom's recording, those things she said I'd said to the nurse, about when she would die so you could be free. I don't remember saying those exact words, but I do remember feeling those emotions. Being angry at her cancer for trapping us all. Being ashamed of how our lives were changing. The confession cost her visible effort, each word emerging with deliberate care. Robert recognized the courage required to confront such painful truths about oneself. We all said things during that time we wish we could take back, Laura included. There were nights she raged against her body's betrayal, against the doctors, against God. Grief isn't linear or logical. Vanessa turned from the window, her expression serious. I'm not moving back to Austin right away. I've found something in Denver. Independence. Perspective. I'm taking classes at the Community College Medical Office Administration. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work that might help people like Mom. Not the path the sterling bride would have chosen, but perhaps one Laura's daughter needed to explore. Robert felt unexpected pride warming his chest. That sounds like a good direction. But I'd like to come home for holidays. Real ones, not just obligatory appearances, and maybe help with some foundation work remotely, if that's possible. Small steps toward reconstruction. Not the instant reconciliation of Hollywood movies, but the careful rebuilding real relationships required after fundamental breaches. Of course, the foundation could use someone with your organizational skills. And my condo has a guest room that's never been used. As they walked toward the parking garage, Vanessa asked about Whitman Sterling's health, her tone neutral rather than concerned. Robert shared what little he knew. Partial recovery, significantly reduced role at the company, divided family loyalties as various factions positioned for control of the diminished but still substantial Sterling assets. And Christopher, the question emerged with careful detachment. Chicago, last I heard. Executive position at Mercer Financial. The annulment documentation listed his new address there. Robert watched for signs of lingering attachment, but Vanessa's expression revealed only mild curiosity. It's strange. 6 months ago, I thought I loved him enough to build a life together. Now I can barely remember what attracted me to him beyond the obvious status factors. She shook her head slowly. The person I was then feels like a character I played in someone else's story. They reached their vehicles, Robert still the modest Toyota Vanessa's a practical Subaru with Colorado plates. The contrast to their pre-wedding transportation choices couldn't have been more striking. No luxury brands, no status symbols, just reliable machines serving their purpose without pretension. Dinner, Robert asked, not specifying tonight or someday, leaving the timeline in her hands. Vanessa hesitated. Not tonight. I need to settle into the hotel, call my roommate in Denver, prepare for tomorrow. She adjusted the strap of her sensible handbag, another departure from her previous designer accessories. But tomorrow there's a place on South Congress I've been missing, 7 o'clock. A specific time, a favorite restaurant, small commitments that signaled willingness to engage rather than retreat. Robert nodded, careful not to overreact to this modest olive branch. I'll make a reservation. They parted with an awkward moment of indecision, handshake, hug, simple nod, before Vanessa stepped forward and briefly, lightly embraced him. Not the effusive performance hugs she'd given at social functions during her Sterling courtship phase, but something genuine if still guarded. Robert drove home through Austin's evening traffic, the foundation opening ceremony replaying in his mind. Not just the public success, but the private breakthrough with Vanessa. Not reconciliation yet, but the first tender shoots of possibility, or would have approved of both development as the community service in her name and the daughter finding her way back to authenticity. At home, Robert changed into more comfortable clothes and settled on his balcony with a glass of the whiskey he now allowed himself occasionally. The night air carried distant music from a downtown venue, the energy of a city constantly reinventing itself. His phone chimed with texts from Maria Lynx to positive coverage of the foundation, opening congratulations from colleagues who couldn't attend questions about tomorrow's follow-up meetings. Among the notifications was an email from an unfamiliar address with a Sterling Capital domain. The subject line read simply, "Thank you." The message itself was equally brief. The research center will help many families avoid what yours endured. Patricia Sterling, Whitman's wife, the woman who had sat beside her husband at the wedding, who had sobbed openly when Robert revealed the truth about the merger agreement and his hidden wealth. Her acknowledgement came without qualifiers or justifications, just recognition of the foundation's purpose, separated from the personal conflicts surrounding its creation. Robert composed a simple reply. Medical advancement benefits us all. I appreciate your message. Not forgiveness exactly, but a small bridge across a chasm of justified resentment. Laura would have approved of that too. The next morning brought fresh challenges. The foundation launch had generated substantial interest, leading to donation offers that required careful vetting. Robert spent hours with Maria and the executive director establishing protocols for accepting contributions only from sources aligned with their core mission. More than once, he declined significant funding that came with problematic strings attached, or from donors whose business practices contradicted the foundation's ethical guidelines. We could do more with their money, the executive director argued after one particularly large corporate offer was rejected due to the company's history of predatory pharmaceutical pricing. Robert remained firm. We could do more harm to Laura's legacy by associating with the organizations that profit from patients' desperation. The foundation will grow more slowly, but with integrity intact. By late afternoon, Robert felt the familiar fatigue that followed major events, his energy flagging as he reviewed proposed research grant applications. Maria noticed his diminished focus and suggested they continue tomorrow. He accepted gratefully, remembering his dinner commitment with Vanessa. The South Congress restaurant Vanessa had suggested was a casual, farm-to-table place they'd frequented as a family during Laura's healthier days. Nothing pretentious, just quality ingredients prepared with care. Robert arrived early, securing a quiet corner table away from the windows, where evening diners might be recognized. Vanessa appeared precisely at 7, her punctuality, another departure from her recent Sterling-adjacent lifestyle, where fashionable lateness had become habit. She wore the pearl necklace again, paired with simple linen slacks and a blouse that favored comfort over display. Her smile when she spotted Robert contained genuine warmth rather than social performance. The meal unfolded with initial awkwardness, gradually giving way to easier conversation. They spoke of neutral topics, first the foundation's architectural details, Denver's unexpectedly vibrant art scene, Austin's ever-changing restaurant landscape, safer ground than family history or recent wounds. Over dessert, a shared peach cobbler that had been Laura's favorite, Vanessa finally broached more personal territory. I found Mom's journals in storage last week, the ones she kept during her teaching years. Robert set down his spoon, surprised. I didn't know you had those. You gave them to me right after the funeral. I put them away, couldn't bear to read them then. Vanessa traced patterns in the condensation on her water glass. Reading them now, it's like discovering a different version of her. So passionate about education, so invested in her students' futures. The woman in those pages isn't the same one I remember from those final hospital months. The observation cut to the heart of their different experiences of Laura. Robert had known her for decades, had loved the vibrant teacher, the enthusiastic hiker, the fierce advocate for classroom funding. Vanessa's formative memories had been increasingly dominated by Laura's illness, by the diminished version cancer had created. She was extraordinary, before the diagnosis and even during treatment until the very end. Robert chose his words carefully. Those journals capture her essence better than the hospital memories. Vanessa nodded slowly. There's an entry from when I was 10. She described a science fair project I did on butterfly migrations. How proud she was that I'd worked so independently, how she saw researcher potential in my methodology. A faint smile touched her lips. I'd completely forgotten that project. But reading her words brought it all back, staying up late, painting backdrops, tracking monarch butterfly sightings on a map, her helping me practice my presentation. The memory hung between them, bittersweet, with recognition of all that cancer had stolen, not just Laura's life, but the continuity of such moments building toward a shared future. She kept teaching until the first round of chemo made it impossible, Robert recalled. Even then, she graded papers from her hospital bed. The principal had to practically order her to take medical leave. Vanessa's expression softened. The last journal entry was 3 weeks before she died. She wrote about watching you sleep in the hospital chair beside her bed, how grateful she was for your constancy, how worried she was about how you'd manage without her. Robert felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. Laura had never shared those thoughts with him directly, perhaps not wanting to burden him further. She was always thinking of others, even at the end. She wrote about me too, her concerns that I was becoming materialistic, measuring worth by possessions rather than character. That I was pulling away from both of you as a defense mechanism. Vanessa's voice wavered slightly. She saw it happening even then. The path I was taking that eventually led me to the Sterlings, to that wedding, to table 14. The restaurant had emptied around them, the dinner service concluding. Their server approached discreetly to offer coffee, which they declined. Still neither moved to leave the conversation, having finally reached its essential core. I judged you for the choices you made after Mom died, Vanessa continued after a moment. Moving to a smaller place, driving an older car, living, so, basically, I thought you were giving up, surrendering to grief. I was embarrassed by what I saw as decline. Robert absorbed the admission, feeling its sting, but recognizing its importance. And I judged you for gravitating toward wealth and status, for seeming to value the Sterlings' social position over our family history. The mutual acknowledgement of misunderstanding hung between them, not quite healing the breach, but exposing its foundations so repair might begin. The money doesn't matter to me anymore, Vanessa said finally. Living in Denver on my own savings, making rent payments, budgeting for groceries, it's been clarifying. I don't need millions to be satisfied. Just purpose, connection, authenticity. Laura's lessons finding root at last, though, through a circuitous and painful path. Robert felt simultaneous grief and gratitude sorrow that Laura hadn't lived to see this evolution's appreciation, that her wisdom had ultimately prevailed. The money never mattered to me either, he replied. It was always a means to an end, first building the company, then trying to save your mother, finally honoring her memory through the foundation. The years of living modestly weren't a hardship. They were a choice aligned with what I valued. They walked together to the parking lot, the night air carrying the scent of food trucks and live music from nearby venues. Austin continuing its vibrant life around them while they reconnected with a shared past temporarily overshadowed by misunderstanding. When do you head back to Denver? Robert asked as they reached their cars. Sunday evening. I took a few days off to be here for the foundation opening. Vanessa hesitated. Would you show me the new condo tomorrow? I'd like to see where you are living now. A small request but significant interest in his current life rather than fixation on past grievances. Of course. And perhaps you could tell me more about your studies, the medical administration program. They parted with another brief hug, more natural than the previous days. Still not the easy physical affection they'd once shared, but progress nonetheless. Robert watched her drive away, feeling cautious optimism, replacing the hollow ache that had accompanied thoughts of Vanessa for so long. The next morning, Robert woke to news alerts about Sterling Capital. The board had voted to remove Sterling from the company name, rebranding as Meridian Financial Group, a symbolic severing from the family whose reputation had become a liability. The article mentioned Whitman's retirement due to health concerns and Patricia's decision to step back from social obligations associated with the firm. Robert forwarded the article to Maria with a simple note, evolution or erasure. Her reply came quickly, both, business pragmatism with a side of historical revision. He couldn't muster either satisfaction or sympathy at the Sterling family's corporate fate. Their attempted appropriation of Hale Dynamics had been thwarted, justice in that sense served. But the collateral damage to employees, to clients, to the broader financial community brought no pleasure. Truth had indeed been a weapon with blast radius beyond its intended target. Vanessa arrived at the condo mid-morning bearing pastries from a local bakery they'd frequented during her childhood. Another small connection to their shared past and another tentative bridge across recent divides. She toured the space with genuine interest, noting the few familiar pieces Robert had kept from their family home. Laura's reading chair, the handmade bookcase from her classroom, photographs spanning decades of shared life. It suits you, she concluded, settling on the balcony with a coffee. Comfortable without being showy, practical but not austere. Robert recognized the assessment as approval rather than criticism. The view reminds me of why we chose Austin originally. The energy, the creativity, the sense of possibility. And they spent the morning in easier conversation than the night before, Vanessa describing her Denver apartment, her roommate's rescue dogs, the medical clinic where she volunteered. Not the life she'd imagined when standing beside Christopher at the wedding, but one she was building deliberately, brick by careful brick. I saw the news about Sterling Capital's rebranding, she mentioned eventually. Meridian Financial Group sounds suitably generic. Robert watched her expression for signs of regret or attachment, finding none. Corporate identity consultants earn fortunes helping companies distance themselves from problematic pasts. Vanessa nodded, sipping her coffee. Christopher called last month, from Chicago, wanted to clear the air about the annulment filing language. Claimed his lawyers had overstepped with the fraudulent representation phrasing. The revelation came without emotional inflection, simply information shared, not wounds reopened. And your response? I told him I was in class and couldn't talk. Then I blocked his number. She shrugged lightly. Some conversations aren't worth having. A lesson hard won, but valuable. Robert felt another surge of pride at her developing discernment. The foundation board meets quarterly. The next session is in December around the holidays. If you're planning to visit, then perhaps you'd like to attend. No pressure to participate actively. Just to observe, understand the work better. The invitation represented more than foundation business. It was an acknowledgement of her place in Laura's legacy, an opportunity to connect with something larger than their personal history. Vanessa touched the pearl necklace reflexively. I'd like that. Maybe by then I'll have completed my first certification. Might have more to contribute. They parted that afternoon with plans for dinner the following evening, their last, before Vanessa's return to Denver. Not the instant reconciliation of sentimental fiction, but the careful, deliberate reconstruction of a relationship too important to abandon, yet too damaged for quick fixes. Alone again, Robert opened Laura's iPhone, scrolling past the wedding confrontation recording to find happier memories. Her voice describing a student's breakthrough moment, her laughter at a joke he'd made during a weekend camping trip, her humming softly while preparing Sunday breakfast. "She's finding her way back, Laura," he whispered to the empty room. "Not to who she was before you left us, but to who she might become with your wisdom finally taking root." Outside, Austin continued its endless reinvention, cranes marking new construction music spilling from venues, people building lives with whatever materials circumstance had provided. Robert Hale, once hidden behind modest appearances, now stood in the light of public recognition. His company thrived. His foundation launched, his relationship with his daughter cautiously mending. The truth had indeed carried its own timeline, revealing itself when necessary rather than when convenient. That revelation had cost them all, Sterling's and Hale's alike, but had ultimately cleared ground for more authentic growth. The wedding reckoning had been painful but necessary, burning away falsehoods to reveal bedrock values strong enough to build upon. As evening settled over the city, Robert typed a message to Vanessa. "Looking forward to tomorrow night. Your choice of restaurant again." Her reply came moments later. "The place near Zilker Park, where we celebrated Mom's last birthday, if that's not too difficult." Not difficult, healing. Returning to a place of happy memory rather than avoiding painful associations. Robert confirmed the plan, then set his phone aside, content with the day's subtle victories. The foundation launched. Connection with Vanessa renewed, if still tender. Laura's legacy secured both publicly through philanthropy and privately through their daughter's evolution. Some promises once made shape entire lives in their keeping. His vow to Laura 8 years ago had demanded silent sacrifice and ultimately explosive truth. Now, having fulfilled that obligation, Robert could begin writing new chapters, not to replace what had been lost, but to honor it through continued growth. The past remained immutable: Laura's death, Vanessa's estrangement, the wedding confrontation that had exposed long-hidden truths. But the future stretched before them, unwritten, full of possibilities neither Sterling wealth nor Hale technology could predict. What mattered was the foundation they now built upon: honesty, however painful, integrity, however costly, and love, however imperfectly expressed. Truth had indeed been a weapon in Robert's hands that wedding night, but rebuilding and its aftermath would require different tools entirely: patience, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again without guarantees. As Laura had taught their daughter long ago about butterfly migrations, some journeys must be made on fragile wings, across impossible distances, guided by instinct and hope rather than certainty. Robert closed Laura's phone, setting it gently beside a framed photograph of the three of them from happier days. The past preserved, honored, but no longer constraining the present. Tomorrow would bring dinner with Vanessa, more foundation work, continued healing. Small steps forward on a path neither straight nor predictable, but authentically their own. Justice delayed had finally arrived in that Houston ballroom 6 months ago. But justice was merely the beginning, not the conclusion of their story's most important chapter.